All right, well, let's roll the tape now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so back in March 2009, we have a lot of science racks that are going up on this mission. One of them is called the MSR rack, which is a material science research rack. And this rack is going to enable the astronauts to perform different types of experiments in space when it comes to working with different types of materials. When you're in a microgravity environment or zero-G environment, there's things you can do in space that you can't do on Earth. Now, this next picture is one of my favorites. This is the famous Colbert treadmill. And of course, the astronauts have to keep fit when they're on orbit because of the microgravity environment. And they'll be exercising on the Colbert treadmill. Now what you're seeing is we're actually resupplying, or we're going to be packing up the pressurized logistics module with almost 6,000 pounds of crew provisions. We have food and all sorts of provisions to support 6 crew capability. So we spend many hours packing the bags, and then we load them into the MPLM using what they call a rack insertion device, which you can see on there right now. And the rack insertion device actually takes the rack and it puts it into the module. And with the highly skilled technicians from Boeing, they insert the rack into the module. And we do this actually 16 times for all the racks. So it's a very delicate operation, but it works. And then here's a picture of the outside of the Leonardo, the MPLM. And of course, there's our famous Colbert treadmill sticker. And one of the last activities we had before we closed the module for flight was to install the Colbert treadmill sticker. And then we perform some closeouts, and we back out the MPLM, and we eventually close the hatch for flight. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing the technicians using a ground support equipment to help close the hatch, and then we pressurize the module, and we check all the ecosystems out, and we go into the canister, and we'll be on our way to the pad. So closing the hatch does take a little while. Of course, in a zero-G environment, it closes a lot easier, but here on Earth with gravity, we have to be very delicate. When we close the hatch, we have to use special ground support equipment. And we lock the hatch, and we pressurize the seals and make sure everything's ready for flight. And now what you're seeing is we're getting our payloads. One's the MPLM, and the other one's the LMC, which is our external carrier. This is a picture of our external carrier, and we have on top of that an ammonia tank filled with 600 pounds of ammonia. And this tank will actually be moved from the external carrier on orbit. It will be placed in one of the truss sections, and the ammonia will be used for cooling the external hardware on space station. So we have to very delicately install this into the canister. We also take a weight and CG to confirm our weight and our CG in reference to the orbiter. And our next step would be to take the MPLM, and we do the same thing. We pick her up, we weigh it, we take a CG, and then we install it to the canister. And once those payloads are installed, we go to the pad. So you can see the canister, it's the same size as the orbiter payload bay, so it looks very similar to the shuttle payload bay. And this happened about July of 2009 is when we put the LMC and the MPLM into the canister, and about 7 or 8 days later we rolled out to the pad. So you can see the payloads inside the canister. We went to the canister rotation facility, and we rotate the vertical, and we're off for a 3 or 4 hour journey to the pad. And then once we get to the pad, you can see it's a slow process, but it takes time, but it's a proven technique. And once we get to the pad, we'll actually mate the canister to the outside structure, and they actually use cranes to lift the payload canister, matched up to what they call the PIGM, and then they'll bring the orbiter in. So right now, it's a very delicate operation to move the canister up to the payload, and they have to line up just right. This takes a few hours, and then the cranes come down. They'll lift the canister right off its platform, and they'll lift it up into the payload bay. They'll secure it, and the doors will close, and then eventually the orbiter will come. The whole thing will swing over to match the orbiter. So you can see when we started, it was nighttime, and now it's daytime, so it takes a while. Okay, once we get installed once we get the payload onto the pad, the orbiter comes over, and we take our payloads, we move them from what we call the PIGM, or the payload structure, into the orbiter, and you can see the structure right now. That was the orbiting docking system, and then we have the MPLM and the LMC in the orbiter, and now the technicians are closing the doors. And once they close the doors, we'll be ready for flight. And this happened August 9th of 2009. It's a beautiful sight seeing those doors close, getting her ready to go into orbit.